Okay, so I wanted to just first give a brief introduction to the GSU Prevention Research Centers. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the PRCs are a network of CDC-funded academic research facilities in the US that study how people and their communities can avoid or counter risk for chronic illnesses. And the PRC at GSU is headquartered on the Clarkston campus at Perimeter College, and we work with community organizations, state and local governments, residents, and other partners in Clarkston, Georgia, to develop, implement, and evaluate culturally and linguistically appropriate interventions to address disparities and determinants of health for migrants and refugees, and then to disseminate that work at the community, state, and national level. So today's speaker, we have Dr. Jennie Burnet at the GSU Department of Anthropology, and she's going to be leading us in a conversation about both historical and contemporary conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And you can see some of the questions here that are going to get us started. So as part of our prevention research monthly brown bag seminars, we've been exploring different conflict zones around the world in an attempt to educate ourselves about the conflict zones from which many of the individuals with whom we work in Clarkston are fleeing. And so, as I mentioned, this month is focused on the DRC. So at that, I'm going to stop sharing so that Dr. Burnet can share her screen.
Thank you, Ashley. Let's see if I can get this going. All right, and let me start my presentation. Okay, great. So thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I've been doing research in the Great Lakes region of Africa since 1997 was my first trip. Most of my research has been focused on Rwanda and Burundi, but I am familiar also with Democratic Republic of the Congo, its long history of violent conflict. And in addition, I have represented or served as a witness on behalf of several asylum seekers in US immigration courts or before the US Immigration Service. And most recently, I served a year and a half ago as an expert witness in a criminal trial of a Congolese woman accused of crimes in the state of Idaho. So just a few words about to get us started, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is also known as Congo Kinshasa, DR Congo, DROC by US military, the Congo, and formerly known as Zaire, is a country in Central Africa. It is by area the largest country in sub-Saharan Africa and the second largest in all of Africa and the 11th largest in the world. This map here shows you the position of Congo on the African continent, and this is a closer up view. Just to give you a size comparison, the Congo is about 1/4 the size of the United States. So this is a scale overlay of the country of Democratic Republic of Congo with its major cities shown on top of a map of the United States. The capital of the Congo is the city Kinshasa. That's sometimes why it's referred to as Congo Kinshasa to distinguish itself from the Republic of the Congo, its neighbor, which is sometimes referred to as Congo Brazzaville. And you'll notice the two capitals are right across a river from each other. The population of the Congo is an estimated 89.56 million by World Bank data. The current president is Felix Tshisekedi, who came to power in 2018 or 2019 at the end of a long period of political violence and upheaval. One of its major languages is French. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And the currency of the country is the Congolese franc. And Congo's neighbors have also played an important role in the recent conflict in the country. So it's bordered on the south by Angola, on the southeast by Zambia, on the east by Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, on the north by Africa's newest country, South Sudan, by the Central African Republic, and by the Republic of Congo or Congo-Brazzaville. Some basic information about the Congo that's important when thinking about the Congolese diaspora and those Congolese immigrants in the Metro Atlanta area. Approximately 242 languages are spoken in the country. It has 5 official languages: French, Lingala, Swahili, Kikongo, and Shiluba. French, Lingala, and Swahili are the 3 lingua francas of the Congo. Lingala is spoken by most people living in the western half of the country, and Swahili in the eastern half of the country. Many Congolese also speak French. Much of the education system in the Congo is conducted in French. And many Congolese speak French, but they may not necessarily be literate in French. So they may not be able to read and write it, even though they can speak it. Its population is 94.9% Christian, with more than half of that being Roman Catholic. And its economy is predicated primarily on mining and mineral wealth. It is the largest store of mineral wealth in the world, the largest producer of copper, one of the primary sources of diamonds, gold, tin, coltan, lithium, platinum, manganese, and cobalt. The last several minerals mentioned in that list are all vital to our current revolution in our economies, moving towards the use of electric vehicles, for example, in microprocessors, cell phones, and the like. Most of the country's GDP originates or is produced by the mining industry. However, it's important to note that the ordinary Congolese people see few or no benefits from this industry or the tax revenues it produces. And just in passing, I'll note that Congo produces over 70% of the cobalt globally at this moment. And if you're interested in learning more about the mining industry, which is really important to the conflict in the country over the last 30 years, I encourage you to see the recent series of articles published over the weekend by the New York Times, which focuses on China's China has basically taken over most of the mineral rights in the Congo legitimately through making loans and providing foreign aid to the country. And this is actually now a security concern for the United States, and President Biden has spoken about it recently in press conferences. So I'm going to walk you through very briefly Congo's history, focusing on its long history of being exploited by Europeans and other outsiders, and the violence associated with this. I'm happy to share these slides with Dr. Owens afterwards so they can be shared with you, because I'm not going to go into detail on everything. Prior to the arrival of Europeans on the continent of Africa in the 15th century, there was a large Congo empire in what is today parts of Angola, Congo, and the Republic of Congo on the west coast of Africa. This was a highly structured and developed state, and it lasted for over 500 years. Among the first actually converts to Christianity on the continent of Africa was one of the kings of the Congo Empire. The transatlantic slave trade had a dramatic impact on the Congo. It's estimated that 5 million people from what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo were enslaved and sent to the Americas in the 300-year period between 1500 and 1800. Of note, in 1526, Congo's King Alfonso sent a letter to the Portuguese King João III, imploring him to end the practice, stating that his country was being depopulated. So although there were Congolese who participated in this exploitation of humans, the Congolese state at the time was opposed to it. During the scramble for Africa, King Leopold II of Belgium began his colonial project in Central Africa, what became the Congo Free State in the 1870s. At the European conferences held in the mid-1880s, King Leopold of Belgium claimed what is today Democratic Republic of Congo as his own personal property under the name the Congo Free State. So it was not a colony by the state of Belgium, it was his personal property. His idea at the time was to create it as a free trade zone. That is how he sold it at the international conference. However, what happened during this period of time was a brutal system of slave labor used to exploit Congo's rubber and ivory, which were its most precious resources at the time, and that fueled the Industrial Revolution in Europe and in North America. Beginning in the late 1890s, British journalist Edward Morrell began exposing the brutal system of slave labor in the country and started an international human rights campaign, one of the first international human rights movement, and the organization Congo Reform Association. It's in 1902 that Joseph Conrad's novella, The Heart of Darkness, which exposed again much of the horror of the forced labor regime in the Congo Free State, was published. And then finally in 1908, under pressure from this international human rights campaign, King Leopold sold the Congo Free State to the Belgian state, and it formally became a colony of Belgium. Nonetheless, exploitation did not stop, although its brutality was diminished once Belgium took over. And it's estimated that under the period of time that King Leopold ruled the Congo, approximately 10 million people, Congolese people, died during this period of time. And it's only a period of 30 years or so. It's finally in June 1960 that the Congo gained its independence. The period of time between 1960 and 1965 was one of political instability as there was infighting among Congolese. In addition, it should be noted that the CIA was involved in trying to ensure that a communist allied leader did not come to power or remain in power in the Congo. And then finally in 1965, President Mobutu, who was a general in the Congolese army, seized power in a coup d'etat that was supported by the United States Central Intelligence Agency. In 1966, President Mobutu nationalized the mining industry. However, he did this as a way to reclaim the wealth for the Congolese people, as he put it. However, what he did was redistribute the foreign country management of the mines to local elites, mostly friends and family, and he squandered and embezzled billions of dollars through the trade in copper, cobalt, diamonds, and coffee. And President Mobutu's presidency, which continued all the way up until 1997, was one characterized by close allies with the United States in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, but also one of immense corruption, where he personally gained wealth from the state and ensured that close friends and family did as well, while little economic development was happening in the country for the Congolese people. I should note in passing that in 1960, when Congo got its independence from colonialism, it was the second most industrialized nation on the continent of Africa after South Africa. However, under Mobutu, very little development happened outside of the mining industry, and most of the revenues from that industry were stolen. In case you're familiar with the Rumble in the Jungle, this was held in Kinshasa in 1974, the famous fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Mobutu did this as a way to establish his importance in the international arena. The next important period of upheaval for the Congo occurred as a result of the 1994 genocide in neighboring Rwanda. Between April and July 1994, approximately 800,000 Rwandans, Tutsi, and moderate Hutu lost their lives in a state-sponsored genocide. The genocide came to an end with the Rwandan Patriotic Front coming to power militarily in the country and liberating it from the genocidal government. As a result, 1 million Rwandan refugees suddenly entered what was then known as Zaire, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. In short order, there was a cholera outbreak around the city of Goma in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. An estimated 80,000 refugees and Congolese lost their lives as a result of that outbreak. This influx of refugees dramatically destabilized Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, in part because the refugee camps became occupied by the former Rwandan government and militias that were responsible for the genocide. The new government in Rwanda warned the international community that this situation was untenable for them because of the security threats posed by these refugee camps and the armed groups operating in them. As a result, in 1996, Rwanda organized an attack on the Congo and supported an anti-Mobutu rebel group known as the Alliance for the Democratic Liberation Front. They attacked the refugee camps first in Eastern Zaire, and then they continued and marched on the capital, Kinshasa. All of this occurred while President Mobutu was abroad for medical treatment for cancer. Tens of thousands of the Rwandan Hutu refugees in Eastern Congo fled all the way across the country into the forest, pursued by Rwandan army soldiers. Essentially, the refugees were given a choice to return home to Rwanda and face justice at the hands of the new government, or to flee on foot. The First Congo War comes to an end in May 1997 when the AFDL rebels and the Rwandan army seized Kinshasa, and Laurent Kabila, the rebel leader of the AFDL, was installed as the country's president. He, in short order, renamed the country the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And President Laurent Kabila rules from 1997 till 2001, when he died in an assassination. Relations between President Kabila and the Rwandan government, who helped him conquer or take control of the country, soured almost immediately after he came to power. And as a result, the Second Congo War began in 1998. The Second Congo War was a rebellion led by ethnic Tutsi minorities that lived in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, but the Rwandan government also supported their efforts. In short order, neighboring countries of Zimbabwe, Namibia, Angola, and others entered Congo in support of Laurent Kabila's and the Democratic Republic of Congo's army. This war lasted up until 2003. During it, there was much violence that affected Congolese people, and in particular in the Ituri district in northeastern Congo, there was ethnic cleansing. Also, there was a great deal of violence in the eastern provinces of North and South Kivu that border Rwanda and Tanzania and Uganda. Finally, in 2003, a sort of peace was established. It's estimated that during this war, between 1 million and 5 million Congolese lost their lives. The higher number of 5 million was the one established by Médecins Sans Frontières, and it's based on those people who died not as a direct result of combat, but rather as due to poverty and healthcare problems resulting from the prolonged conflict. Just to give you an idea of how these conflicts impacted refugees fleeing the Congo, this graph shows you only those refugees who fled from Congo into neighboring countries or elsewhere. You can see in 1992, it was below 100,000 in that year. And then by 2001, almost 400,000 Congolese were fleeing on an annual basis. In 2001, Laurent Kabila's son, Joseph Kabila, comes to power in the wake of the the assassination of his father. He was president all the way up until 2019. In 2002, Mount Nyiragongo, a volcano in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, erupted and lava poured into the city of Goma, the largest city in Eastern Congo, and over 300,000 residents fled into neighboring Rwanda to escape the lava flows. Within short order, however, most of those residents returned home because they were unwilling to stay in Rwanda once the danger of the eruption was gone. Between 2001 and 2008, President Kabila's government restricted democratic space, and there was widespread human rights violations during this period of time, limits on speech, summary executions, arbitrary arrests, and torture of opponents. Human Rights Watch documented these in a report published in 2008 called "We Will Crush You." Also, even though the war officially ended in 2003, Eastern Congo has been characterized by ongoing violent conflict between various local rebel groups, Rwandans who are continuing to operate in the country, and others. And this conflict continues to generate both internally displaced people and refugees fleeing into neighboring countries. Much of this conflict has been fueled by the search for minerals, gold, diamonds, and coltan in particular in Eastern Congo. And most of these minerals have been leaving Congo through Rwanda. As a result of this, in the Frank-Dodd Act in the mid-2000s, a mineral tagging system was created for the Congo. So all minerals that come to the United States from the Congo are supposed to be tagged at their sites of origin to ensure they're not being exploited by neighboring people or others to fuel the conflict. In 2012 until 2016, in the province of Kasai, which is one of the mineral-rich regions, there was a conflict between Jean-Pierre Pandi, who became chief of a territory in Kasai, and the Congolese federal government. In essence, he tried to declare independence for Kasai from the Democratic Republic of Congo. President Kabila never officially recognized Pandi's authority, and eventually he was killed in clashes between his own rebels and government forces. During this time, 1.4 million people in Kasai province had to flee their homes and became either internally displaced people or refugees if they crossed international borders. The period between 2016 and 2019, there was a great deal of political instability in the Congo as Joseph Kabila kept refusing to step down and refusing to allow there to be democratic elections. Eventually, after democratic elections in 2019, President Felix Tshisekedi came to power. So just again to show you how these conflicts and crises generated refugees and asylum seekers. This table shows you from 2003 to 2012. Note the scale, though, is quite different than the previous table. This is 200,000 and 600,000. So you can see that from 2003 to 2012, most years, refugees were over the 400,000 and close to the 500,000 mark. In addition, asylum seekers were just below or in the high, around 80,000 a year during this period of time. This chart now shows you the same from 2013 to 2020. Again, it's now for this period of time over 500,000, almost, and then over 750,000 refugees generated per year from the Congo. This means people leaving the Congo, fleeing conflict or other human rights violations. You can also see asylum seekers are persistently high during this period of time. Another key factor is the internally displaced persons during this period. And you can see between 2.5 million and in 2020, over 5 million Congolese are displaced inside the country due to either conflict or to humanitarian crises. So there's a massive amount of displaced people in the Congo. Let's see, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Did I succeed in doing that? No. Let's see.
Yes, you did.
I did. Okay, good. Thanks. And let me turn to my handwritten notes quickly. So just to get to some of the other questions I was asked to cover in this session, what is currently being done by the international community to address these conflicts? Well, of course, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, is supporting refugees who are in neighboring countries, and they're also providing support to internally displaced people in the Congo. Now, UNHCR receives its funding from member nations. Under the Trump administration, the United States curtailed its payments to UNHCR to almost zero. That has increased now that President Biden took office. But with the massive refugee crisis globally, there is not enough support being provided to refugees or IDPs in Congo. Another way the international community, however, is trying to support Congolese refugees is through refugee resettlement. Initially, when President Trump took office in 2016, it was a boon for Congolese refugees who were officially recognized by the UNHCR because the Trump administration gave preference to Christian refugees for resettlement in the United States. And so during that period of time, many Congolese came to the United States, and in particular here to Metro Atlanta area. Eventually, however, the Trump administration curtailed refugee resettlement to an almost zero and actually took the threshold below the levels set by law by the Congress in the 1980s and the 1980 Refugee Act. I would add that Congolese are among the migrants trying to reach Europe, United States, and Canada through extra legal routes. I have encountered Congolese who are in various asylum proceedings or deportation proceedings here in the United States who crossed into the United States by crossing from the Mexico border into the country. So Congolese are contributing to these migrant crises globally. What is the impact of these conflicts on members of the Congolese diaspora, the Congolese people, and others with connections in the affected area? Well, I would say that Congolese here in Metro Atlanta continue to be impacted directly by these conflicts because most of them send money back to support family members they left behind. And those family members often become victims of violent crimes and conflict. All of the conflicts in the Congo in the last 30 years have had very high levels of sexual violence against women and girls, but also sexual violence against men. And there's a lot of silence in particular around male sexual violence survivors, but also among women and girls for two reasons. One is that the problem was so severe and so ubiquitous that most have experienced it. And two, important cultural taboos on talking about sex at all or talking about violence attached to sex. So just to conclude about the impact on the Congolese diaspora, I would say that the vast majority of Congolese who arrived here in the Metro Atlanta area as refugees or as asylum seekers all qualify as survivors of torture under US law and thus merit services. I'm on the Georgia Advisory Board of the Center for Victims of Torture. I know they've served a lot of Congolese in the last several years and actually usually have more demand for their services than they're able to provide. But all the other partners and interested parties in Clarkston area who are serving refugee and asylum populations have many Congolese among their among their clients. That's the end of my formal presentation, and I'm happy to try to answer your questions.
Thanks, Dr. Burnet. I do see one question in the chat from Nasser. So Nasser, I can just read this or you can unmute yourself if you'd like. I don't know if you can see that question.
I can see the question. I'll read it out. So Nasser asks, wasn't Belgian colonialism of Congo more honest as opposed to other Europeans, since Belgium didn't even pretend to have a civilizing mission? I suppose that's perhaps true on a theoretical level. I would say, though, that particularly under the Congo Free State period, the brutality and exploitation of humans was far beyond much of what happened in other European colonies on the continent at that time, in that it was common under the Congo Free State for people to be held captive, or for their children to be taken and held captive until the parents arrived with a certain quota of rubber from the forests, or the chopping off of limbs and other kinds of torture and maiming.
Crispin, it looks like you have wanted to add to that.
Yes. I am Crispin Ilombe from DRC myself, born and raised in eastern part of the Congo, and I first appreciate this wonderful presentation. For me as Congolese, it's always encouraging to hear at least somebody from US to give such a good, presentation about the Congo. When you learn the history of Congo, it was worse because the colonial system of Belgians in Congo used to be called paternalism, meaning for Belgians, all Congolese were only treated like kids. They could not do anything, and they have to consider Belgians as their fathers, paternalism. Therefore, as a result, for all those years of colonizations, Belgium did not prepare any elite to take over after independence. Therefore, on June 30th, when Congo got its independence, so there was a big lack of elite to lead the country. So as you said, from 1960 to 1965, it was the collapse of the system. So when we say that it was good, so when you see French, Portuguese, they were having the politics of assimilations, but for Belgians, it was paternalism, where Congolese were like kids who could not do anything.
Thank you, Crispin, for adding to that. And thank you for the question, Nasser.
You're welcome. Thank you.
While we wait for more questions, one thing I'd like to add is, although my large historic view of the Congo sort of portrays the Congolese people as victims, I'd like to add that they aren't silent victims, and they are many important Congolese organizations, civil rights organizations, human rights organizations, and humanitarian organizations that are both trying to help those who have become victims of violent conflict or humanitarian crisis or peace building or conflict resolution and other kinds of things. And also I would add that although we can talk about the history of the Roman Catholic Church and its negative roles in the Congo, these days the Catholic Church is perceived as helping to build peace and helping to mitigate conflict in much of the country.
Okay, so a couple of other questions, Dr. Burnet. So from Chloe, what's the anticipated result, economic, political development of China's involvement in the current mining industry? I had kind of a similar follow-up question to your comment early on about the New York Times pieces this past weekend. So would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so sort of the watershed moment for China's involvement in the Congo was 2008, when they signed a massive aid package in exchange for securing mineral rights over some of the largest mines in the Congo. And that agreement promised $9 billion of investment granted to be paid back in loans. So they were low interest rate loans from China, much in the way that the World Bank and the IMF actually develop countries by loaning them money. And the loans were to be paid by the mining revenue. This was launched with great fanfare. President Joseph Kabila appeared all over the country, and some things were done. Schools were built in various places. New roads were built. Now, keep in mind, most of the roads are built to the mining areas as a way to get the minerals out and where they need to go for exports. So some new electric production, hydroelectric production, and a few other projects. However, since then, most of these development projects that were promised have not been delivered. And in that New York Times article, you'll see there's debate. China says that the Congolese government mismanaged the money and that it was all embezzled. The Congolese government says that China didn't deliver the funds as promised or didn't build the projects as promised. So there is there's a conflict there of different sides of the story. I suspect probably there's the reality is somewhere that there's truth to both sides of those stories. And then the last thing I would say is now it's the Congolese government is accusing China, according to the New York Times reporting, of lying about the amount of minerals that it's exploiting and exporting as a way to minimize the payments they have to make to the Congolese government. I think what'll be interesting, and the New York Times reporting on this highlights it, is the Biden administration has recognized this as a national security threat to the United States, given that not 70% of the world's cobalt is in the Congo, and cobalt is the most important mineral for producing the kinds of batteries for electric vehicles. And so China has intentionally, through its engagement in the Congo, has locked up the rights to the vast majority of rare earth minerals and other minerals necessary for the electric green energy revolution. And so the Biden administration is recognizing this as a threat. It remains to be seen how the Biden administration will interact with the Congolese government and with China over these issues. Let's see, I see there was another question from Crispin. Can you explain the connection between all these conflicts and the need of mineral resources around the world? I think I just hinted at that. Congo is the largest single mineral wealth in the world for all of the minerals needed for the green energy economy, anything tied to electrification and storage of electric energy under current technology. And definitely it is fueling these conflicts. In particular, the conflict in Eastern Congo from 1997 all the way up until the present is fueled by these minerals. In particular, in Eastern Congo, it's coltan, which has fueled much of this. Coltan is required for every single microprocessor in the world. So all of our cell phones have coltan in them. When I first went to Rwanda in 1997, people were already beginning to exploit coltan, and I had several friends invite me to get involved in the business. I quickly realized much of these minerals were coming out of Congo and people were dying over fights over them. And so I said, no, thank you. This is not a business I'd like to be a part of. So with the mineral tagging system that was put in place to help curtail this exploitation. But what's happened in the interim is China has taken over most of this mineral exploitation, and China doesn't care about mineral tagging. And so the tagging system at this point is almost completely ineffective, since it's China that's exploiting most of these minerals. In addition, most of the microprocessor production in the world is concentrated in China. So almost all of our phones that we're using were produced in factories in China, either completely or in part. So every time we make a phone call, we are participating unfortunately, in supporting these conflicts. I see the next question from Tahajna. Are you familiar with strategies used to assist with mental health issues resulting from the sexual crimes committed to those refugees? I am. I would say that of the organizations I'm familiar with that are operating in the Congo and that are run by Congolese, they do use some Western medicine kind of talk therapy approaches, but they tend to actually emphasize other kinds of approaches that are more culturally suitable to Congolese survivors of sexual violence, in that among most peoples in this part of the world, talking about bad experiences is not acceptable. You're discouraged from talking about bad things that happen to you. It's as if you're trying to invite them to come again, is sort of the way it's seen. And so many of these organizations that are operating in the Congo, they will use art therapy, singing, dancing, praying, and other ways of helping people process the very difficult emotions and traumatic memories tied to those experiences. Here in the United States, most agencies are providing services in the forms of talk therapy, some group therapy. I know Center for Victims of Torture, CVT Georgia, primarily provides talk therapy, but also in a holistic support network where they provide social services of a social worker and ensure that people's basic needs are being met. The reality is that no one can really face the consequences, the emotional and psychological consequences of traumatic events if they don't have food to eat, secure housing, or basic health care. And so that is important to make sure those needs are met first. So I hope, Tahajna, that is a little bit of an answer to your question. Moving on to Shanae's question, what do you recommend we could do as community workers to continue to support this population of refugees? That is a great question. I would say there's a wide variety of organizations that offer different kinds of support to refugees. And I think that is important to offer all kinds of different support. I know that some of the Congolese refugees I worked with in Louisville, Kentucky, before I moved to Atlanta, they found actually what was really helpful to them was group sort of activities that brought them together with people from their own communities, but not to necessarily do mental health work, but to learn sewing or to sew with each other or to take English classes together, because that sort of social contact allowed them opportunities to talk about things. Another thing, Shanae, is just to listen empathetically if people choose to talk to you about what they live through. In my own research in Rwanda, I found direct questions about people's bad experiences were rarely answered with detailed narratives about what they lived through. However, sharing a Coke with a friend in a cafe in the afternoon, or visiting them at their home would be the times that they would then unprompted share stories from their past. And what they wanted in those instances was someone to listen with an open ear to what they had to say. And that's a way of providing support to people. Again, I think it's important just to make yourself available to hear those things. And then I think beyond that, just helping people, I think one of the challenges in Georgia in general is that we have a very, our social safety net is almost non-existent, whether for refugees or for American-born people. And so I think just helping to ensure that people's basic needs are being met is a huge way to help in addition.
Looks like also, Crispin, you made the point about kind of the corruption in the country with respect to the political leaders, and that many times people, it sounds like you included, had to flee the country because of criticizing that corruption. Just wanted to give you a chance to add to that or say more about that. That certainly is an important issue to highlight.
Thank you so much. I always hear many Congolese complaining and criticizing the Western government as being the causes of their suffering. But also, Western government don't go there by themselves. They sign some agreements with some political leaders. I can give you an example. Congo is the only country where a general or officer in the army is kind of promoted when he's sent to the front line in eastern part of the Congo. Because he knows when he goes there, he's not going there to fight. So he's going there to control a piece of land where he'll be in charge of controlling those things. So last week, that document that was produced in Europe, how Kabila and his group, they have used more than 136 million of just, so it's too much corruption. Last week in my tiny small village in eastern part of the Congo called Kamituga, where Chinese has been exploiting gold, they have been abusing people, kicking people out of their villages without any official documents, but the governor of South Kivu State is the one allowing them to do that. So they provide everything, millions of dollars to one person, a governor, a minister, or everything, and they are allowed to do that. Those mining sites by Chinese are protected by Congolese soldiers. So there is that corruption, and I was just happy to see the graph about asylum seeker. So why are those people seeking asylum? Because whenever you try to criticize the government, your entire family is threatened. I had to flee Congo in 2011 because we were pointing out how the result of the elections of 2011 was made by corruption. So on one side, we are living in a capitalistic world where everybody is looking for cheap minerals. So if they can get it for a cheaper price using the political leaders in Congo, why not? So why they don't do that in Zambia and somewhere else? Because our political leaders are so corrupted that they are sacrificing the entire country, the entire nation for their own benefits. None of our political leaders' children are studying in Congo. They are all in Europe, in US, in Canada, while our poor families are suffering there. And that's the big paradox of Congo. You have all those resources. It's called like a richest country with those minerals, but people are the poorest in the country. With 3 master's degrees in Congo, teaching in college, in high school, I was paid $30 a month when I am paid. When I am paid. So it's to criticize others, but I think as Congolese, and that's where I can cry, how could democratic nations around the world could support Congolese people to overthrow all corrupted leaders?
Yeah, thank you for that, Crispin. I think, that's really informative and helpful to have some perspective about what's happening inside the country and how much the corruption is affecting the people trying to live there, and that it's none of these activities are happening in a vacuum, that there is some complacency probably in some cases, and also some active corruption, as you've said, that where money and resources are being funneled to a very small group of powerful people, where many of the others are left behind. And Jenny, you referred to this early in your talk about how this is such a wealthy country in terms of resources, and yet most of the people living in the country, except for that small minority that Crispin referenced, are not getting any of the benefits of all of those wealthy resources.
Yes, that's incredibly true. And coming back to minerals and our ability to influence what's happening, I think one thing we can do is the companies whose products we consume, whether it's Apple or Tesla or Google, these are all companies that are using and engaged in exploiting Congo's minerals directly or indirectly. And one thing we can do is we can tell them that we care, that we don't want them using conflict minerals. That doesn't mean that they're going to change overnight. They often find ways to get around these regulations, but they need to know that we care about this and that we're paying attention to this. That's one small way that we can engage on this issue. And the other is to speak to our political leaders and encourage them to, take action to oppose corruption in the Congo, and to ensure that that corrupt leaders don't stay in power. Mobutu stayed in power because he was backed by the United States for decades and decades, because he was their guy in Central Africa. And so that is our we have to take responsibility for that as Americans, that our government did that, and we have to make it clear to them that we're not interested in that anymore. That's what I'll add. Are there other questions? I think we're almost out of time, but.
Yes. So what I'll do, we have just a couple minutes. Just wanted to thank all of you. Really, thanks to Dr. Burnet for your presentation. It was really helpful to me to have a better sense about both the historical and contemporary conflicts. And thanks to Nasser for your questions, Crispin for all that you added to this conversation. I appreciate it. Being a Congolese and being able to speak from personal experience is really valued. And just want to encourage everyone, please visit our PRC website, send me questions or comments via email. Let us know if you want to be on our listserv for future Brownbag events. All of that information is listed here. We'll post the recording from today on our website as well. And again, just really want to thank Dr. Burnet for your talk today. Appreciate your time, and thank all of you for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
My pleasure. Bye, everybody. Thank you for attending.